Here's an example of another screen. This is a simple bird dog exercise. And we all know how bird dogs perform. Generally, the person goes into some sort of quadruped position. And if you were to take a dowel and place it along someone's spine, theoretically, like when you're standing, you should have these 3 points of contact. More importantly, in those 3 points of contact, we want to see that natural spacing right here in the lumbar spine. All right? Now, if you're following that MOVE acronym, and we're going to ask the person to do this position, we're asking for sagittal plane hip extension. That means the hip is extending, the knee is extending. Not overly concerned about the foot. And we're asking the contralateral arm to come up into shoulder flexion. And ideally, we're trying to get the legs and the arm parallel with the floor. So now we ask the person to perform the movement. Now, in a perfect world, the spine stays neutral, the thigh goes straight back. If you were placing a dowel right here, it would remain somewhat parallel to the floor, right? These 3 points of contact would remain, right? And the shoulder, the arm would be parallel to the ground, and that arm would be purely in the sagittal plane. That's a lot of times what we don't see. What we might see is situation where we see kind of this big arch occur right here, right? And that might bring the head up too. So now we see the points of contact are being lost, we're seeing an increase in that arch. Why is that arch increasing? Is it a lack of lumbar stability? Or is it, as we know, if I have a lack of mobility of the hips, I may borrow from my neighbor, which means I'm borrowing from the lumbar spine. So it could be a lack of hip mobility. We've got to figure out what it is. Well, we could spend a little bit of time mobilizing the hip. Let's do a little bit of hip flexor stretching, a little bit of glute activation. Let's repeat the screen, identify whether there's any noticeable improvement. If it appears to improve, it might be a hip mobility issue. If there's no improvement, it might be the assumption this is a lumbar stability issue. Right? It could be both. Right? Same thing in the upper extremity. If I'm doing the movement and the arm comes up to a different plane, why are we moving into different planes? Something is limiting that. So a good way to assess that is take yourself back into the overhead reach. And we can look at what's happening through kind of this movement right there. Now, why is that movement somewhat relevant? Because we talked about movement screen should mimic our activities of daily living. Well, think of walking. Anytime you walk, when this hip is engaged, so you are pushing off this right hip, what is your left shoulder complex doing? It's pulling. So there's a connection between the right hip and the left shoulder, right? And of course the opposite side with the opposite hip. And that's what we're simply measuring through here. It's this diagonal movement. It's called the posterior oblique line. And it's going through the fascia of the back. And we're looking at whether you have that pattern in an unloaded environment. If that pattern is dysfunctional there, it's probably a safe assumption to say that it might be dysfunctional when you're walking.